She was the untamable alien slave until a human gave her freedom. In the darkest corners of a ruined colony, a girl once called nothing but the Wild One clawed her way out of chains and into the storm. Broken, starved, hunted, she should have been swallowed by the night. But fate led her to the door of a man who carried his own scars, a soldier who had every reason to turn her away, yet gave her the one thing no one ever had: choice. What followed was not just a fight for survival, but a story of defiance, trust, and a love fierce enough to burn against an empire. Rain poured like molten silver across the market district of Zarathia, each droplet slicing through the darkness with an almost deliberate cruelty. The night was alive with the stench of old iron, rotting fruit, and burned oil, but it was silent in a way that felt heavier than screams. Stalls stood like skeletons. Cages creaked in the wind, their hinges rusted into throats that groaned but could not cry out. This was the Rose Verge, where living beings were not born free but displayed like commodities, priced by the ounce of their defiance. In the third row of cages, behind a door whose lock had been patched and repatched so many times it was more scar than mechanism, a girl pressed her cheek to the bars. Her name, though almost no one remembered it, and fewer still dared to speak it, was Sarin. To the handlers she was only the Wild One. They had starved her, whipped her, stripped her of dignity, but never of resistance. Sarin refused to bow, and so they broke her body again and again, trying to mold her into something pliant. What they did not understand was that a spirit does not shatter with the same ease as bone. Her body was bruised into a map of old violence, her ribs sharp under translucent skin, yet her eyes still burned like frozen flame. That fire frightened buyers. They wanted soft creatures, easily broken, eager to obey. Sarin was none of these things. She was too much alive, too much untamable. And so she had lingered here, caged like a dangerous relic no one dared to claim. But tonight, the world tilted. The storm gave cover, rain falling hard enough to blur eyes and ears. The guards had grown complacent, half drunk, believing no one in her state could move, much less flee. Sarin had been waiting for months, perhaps years. It was hard to tell anymore, for a mistake this small. Her hand, thin as bone, slipped through the bars to a jagged corner where rust had chewed the lock into brittleness. The storm drowned out the metallic snap as the mechanism yielded. The cage door opened with a sigh that sounded like surrender. She did not run. Running would draw eyes. She moved like shadow instead, crawling, dragging her half-starved limbs over the mud-slick ground. The rain stung her cuts, soaked her tangled white hair, but it washed her scent away. The market that once reeked of slavery became her camouflage. She emerged into the alley, trembling so violently she thought the sound of her bones would give her away. A vendor's tarp whipped in the wind. Chains lay coiled in puddles like dead serpents. Sarin staggered past them, her bare feet slicing on broken glass. And though people glimpsed her, their eyes catching that shocking cascade of white hair, those fox-like ears twitching against the storm, they turned away. To them she was not a girl. She was a broken life, a creature the market had ruined beyond repair. In a city like Zarathia, no one risked punishment for harboring one of those. Better to pretend she was invisible, unwanted, untouchable. Sarin kept moving. Hunger gnawed her belly like a beast. Weakness made every step a question of whether she would collapse. Yet something inside her whispered, not yet, not here. The alley sloped upward toward the towers, where the air grew slightly cleaner and the neon hummed in broken strips. Her vision blurred, each breath a razor dragged through her lungs. She thought perhaps this would be the end after all. Freedom claimed only to die in the gutter, until she saw it. A flicker of light. It glowed from a cracked window on the 7th floor of an apartment block, hunched against the rain. Not the warm golden glow of taverns or the harsh blue of authority. This light was small, pale, almost private, as though someone had forgotten to hide their humanity. Sarin's body moved before her mind could weigh the risks. She stumbled across the flooded street, hauled herself up the broken stairwell, one trembling hand after another dragging her upward. She lost count of the steps. Numbers blurred into pain, but eventually she reached the 7th floor, her chest burning, her breath ragged. She stood before the door where light leaked through the crack at the bottom. Her hand hovered, uncertain. Every instinct screamed that behind doors waited more chains, more fists, more commands. Yet the storm outside had made her colder than death, and hunger carved her stomach hollow. What was left to lose? Her knuckles touched the wood. The sound was small, barely more than the rain itself. Inside, footsteps approached. The door opened. A man stood there, tall and lean, his silhouette edged by the dim glow of a desk lamp. His hair was dark, messy in the way of someone who didn't care much about appearances. His clothes plain, work shirt rolled at the sleeves, boots left untied, but it was his eyes that froze her. They were steady, unreadable, not the eyes of a predator, not hungry, not calculating. They held her as though she were real, not a product, not a curse, just real. For a moment, neither moved. Saren's body tensed, ready for the lunge, the shove back into the corridor, but it did not come. The man, Darren, though she did not know his name yet, shifted slightly and something metallic clinked against the floor. A key. He placed it deliberately between them. No words, no chains, just the key. It took Saren a heartbeat too long to understand. The door remained open. He was not pulling her in. He was not forcing her away. The choice, the impossible thing she had not held in her hands for so long, was hers. Her fingers trembled. Her entire life had been survival without permission. Yet here was a stranger who gave her the one weapon she had been denied. Choice. The rain behind her howled like a beast. The apartment before her smelled faintly of warmth, of tea leaves and dry wood. Saren's bare foot edged forward, almost against her will. And for the first time in her life, the cage was behind her, not before her. She crossed the threshold. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the storm into a distant roar. Saren stood motionless, her breath shallow, as if any sound she made might shatter the fragile reality she had just stepped into. The room was dim, lit only by the desk lamp and the soft reflection of neon leaking through half-drawn blinds. The walls were bare except for shelves stacked with data slates and a few crumpled maps. It was not the home of a man seeking beauty or comfort. It was the shelter of someone who had forgotten both. Darren moved past her without speaking, his footsteps steady, unhurried. He poured water into a chipped glass and set it on the table, the way someone might leave bread out for a wild animal. Not toward her, not in demand, but simply there. Saren's eyes narrowed. Every fiber of her body screamed caution. Men did not give without expecting. Men demanded always. Yet he did not look at her, not even to track her movements. He sat at the table, scrolling through the glowing data slate, as though her presence was a weather pattern he had chosen to accept. Her throat ached with thirst so sharp it felt like knives. She told herself she would not take the bait. She would not be fooled by kindness staged to disarm her, and yet her hand betrayed her. Slowly, shakily, she moved toward the glass. The water was lukewarm, but it slid down her throat like salvation. She drank until it was gone, then placed the empty glass back with a controlled hand, as though admitting nothing. When she looked up, Darren's eyes were on her now. Calm, measuring. Not with the calculation of a buyer, but with the patience of someone cataloging details for truth. She felt exposed, as if he could see every scar under her skin. Hungry? His voice was low, neutral, a soldier's voice trained to carry without weight. The question disarmed her more than kindness had. She had no words left for such simple humanity. Her lips parted, but all she could manage was a silent nod. He rose again, moving to a storage unit against the wall. When he opened it, the smell of packaged rations drifted out. He set one on the table, tore it open, and slid it across to her without ceremony. Saren's heart hammered. She stared at the food like it was a trap wired with explosives. Slowly she reached for it, her fingers twitching. She tasted cautiously, like an animal sniffing at bait, but nothing came. No sting, no drug, just bland, salted sustenance. Her body betrayed her again. She devoured the ration with desperate speed, tearing it apart, swallowing like someone who feared the food would vanish if she paused. When it was gone, shame crept in, staining her cheeks. She had shown weakness before the stranger, But Darren only leaned back in his chair, arms folded, as though her survival mattered more than her pride. Silence stretched between them, thick but not suffocating. Saren's fox-like ears twitched, catching every small sound. The drip of rain from her hair onto the floor, the faint hum of the data slate, the slow rhythm of his breath. She realized then that she was standing in the center of his world, wet and ragged, yet not once had he touched her. That unsettled her more than chains ever had. Her mind raced. Why? What did he want? No one gave choice without price. Suspicion coiled in her belly. She needed to test him. She took a step closer, the thin fabric of her torn garment clinging to her body, rain still dripping from her pale hair down the line of her collarbone. She had been taught, forced, to believe her body was a weapon, her last line of defense or attack. Men wanted what she carried in her skin. If he was like the others, he would reveal himself now. Her fingers brushed his shoulder. Lightly, tentative, like the first move in a game. His eyes lifted to hers, steady, unmoving. He did not flinch, nor did he lean in. He simply watched. Saren pressed harder, leaning closer, her lips parting just enough that her breath ghosted against his cheek. The gesture was deliberate, a provocation sharpened to pierce his composure. Still nothing. Her pulse quickened. Anger flared. She pressed her body against his arm, testing, demanding. "Is this not what you want?" Her voice was low, raw, almost a growl. His answer was a silence more cutting than rejection. Finally he spoke, his words a blade dulled by restraint. "I want you to decide what you want." The air cracked between them. Saren staggered back as though struck. No man had ever said that to her. The market had beaten choice out of her, ground it into the mud, replaced it with obedience. Now this stranger gave it back with only a sentence. Her body trembled, not from fear this time, but from something she could not name. The hunger inside her shifted shape. She stood there dripping rain onto his floor, staring at him as though he were a puzzle written in fire. The storm outside screamed against the windows, but within the room, a different storm had begun. Her hands rose to the tattered hem of her garment. She tugged it tighter around her, suddenly aware of her own vulnerability. Her provocations had failed not because he was weak, but because he was immovable. The power had shifted. She was no longer testing him. He had tested her, and she had no idea if she had passed. Her body buzzed, alive with contradiction. Suspicion and curiosity twisted together, pulling her in opposite directions. She should leave, she told herself. Take the key, vanish into the storm, survive another night. But her legs refused. Instead, she lowered herself onto the floor near the table, curling into the corner, her back to the wall, eyes fixed on him like a predator who had found something it could not classify. Darren didn't press. He returned to his seat, scrolling once more through the data slate, as though her presence was simply another fact in his universe. A storm outside, a broken girl inside, both inevitable, neither requiring ownership. The silence stretched again, but now it was laced with a tension electric enough to sting the skin. Saren shifted, restless, her tail brushing against the floor, betraying nerves she did not want him to see. Every sound became sharper, more intimate. The scrape of his chair, the clink of metal when he set his knife down, the sound of his breath, slow and steady, as though he trusted the space she occupied. The trust burned hotter than any chain. Her eyes closed just for a moment, exhaustion dragging at her. The warmth of the room seeped into her bones, loosening knots of fear she had carried for too long. She had not slept unshackled in years. Yet here, with him a few feet away, her body betrayed her one final time. Her head lowered against her arm, her breath slowed. Against her will, against her caution, Saren fell asleep. And Darren watched unmoving, a sentinel in the storm. Saren woke to silence. For a moment she thought she had dreamed the night, that she was still in the cage, still wet with rain and blood, waiting for the next fist to land. But the floor beneath her was warm, the air still smelled faintly of wood and tea, and her body was not bound. She was free, if freedom could be measured in the space of four walls and the presence of a man she did not understand. Her fox-like ears twitched. Darren was there, exactly where she had left him, seated at the table with the data slate. Only now he was different. His posture was taut, his eyes narrowed, his hand hovering near a pistol holstered at his side. The calm soldier had shifted into something sharper. Her pulse leapt. She stayed very still, her body recalling too many lessons about what happened when a man grew tense. But Darren didn't turn on her. His eyes were fixed on the door. Then she heard it. A scrape. A metallic whisper. The sound of someone trying a lock that was not theirs. Her breath caught. Instinct urged her to curl tighter against the wall, to vanish into shadow. But Darren moved with quiet precision. He stood crossed to her and crouched so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Stay here," he whispered. It was not a command, not even a request. It was a strategy shared between equals. Yet the sound of his voice, low, steady, unshaken, sent a thrill racing down her spine. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. 3 figures slipped inside, cloaked in the gray armor of the Rose Verge handlers. Their boots tracked water onto the floor. Their eyes gleamed with the cruelty of men who knew they were predators. And one of them carried a chain, already open, ready to close around her throat again. Sarin's body trembled, rage and terror burning together. She had known freedom for only a handful of hours. She would not let them steal it back. But before she could rise, Darren moved. The pistol was in his hand like an extension of his arm. The shot cracked through the room, deafening against the storm. One of the handlers collapsed, clutching a leg that spurted crimson. The others lunged forward, cursing, weapons raised. Darren grabbed the table, upending it into a barricade. He fired again, controlled, precise. The second handler staggered back, armor smoking. The third rushed him with a blade. Darren met him head-on, slamming the pistol's butt into the man's temple. Bone crunched. The handler dropped. It was over in less than 10 heartbeats. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Darren stood over the fallen men, his breath steady, his pistol still ready. He moved with the discipline of someone who had done this before, too many times in places far worse than this. Sarin stared, her chest heaving, her heart a drumbeat of fear and awe. He had not hesitated. He had not flinched. He had killed for her, though she was nothing to him, nothing but trouble, nothing but risk. Why? Her hands clenched against the floor. She rose slowly, every instinct torn between fleeing and moving closer. The scent of blood filled the air, sharp and metallic, mixing with the storm that howled through the open door. Darren turned to her then, his eyes catching hers. There was no triumph in them, no cruelty, only the steady recognition of someone who had survived too many battles to celebrate another. "You need to decide now," he said. His voice was even, but the weight of his words pressed against her like stone. "If you stay, they'll come back, stronger. If you leave, you might not last the night." Sarin's chest ached. She looked at the bodies, at the chains that had nearly closed on her again, and then at the man who had stood between her and that fate. He did not claim her. He did not tell her what to do. He gave her the knife edge of choice and waited for her to step forward or back. The fire inside her surged. For the first time in her life, choice did not feel like a weapon aimed at her. It felt like a weapon in her hands. Her voice cracked, hoarse from disuse. "I stay." The words tasted like lightning. Darren's eyes softened just enough for her to see it. He nodded once, then holstered his pistol. Without another word, he dragged the unconscious bodies out into the hall, one by one as though cleaning debris from a battlefield. Sarin watched him, her body taut, her mind ablaze. When he returned, his shirt was streaked with blood, his hands raw. He moved to the sink, washed quickly, then sat down again as though nothing had happened. The storm outside swallowed the echoes of violence. Sarin could not sit still. Her body quivered with adrenaline, her tail lashing against the floor. She crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped in front of him, her breath sharp, her hands trembling. "You risked everything," she hissed, her voice breaking between fury and wonder. "For me?" Darren looked up at her, unflinching. "Not for you. For the choice you made." Her knees buckled. She dropped onto the table before him, the wood groaning under her weight. Her face hovered inches from his, her breath mingling with his. The storm lit the room in flashes, painting them in silver and shadow. She searched his eyes, desperate to find the crack, the hidden demand, the inevitable price. But there was nothing. only the maddening calm of a man who had learned not to take what was not freely given. That calm undid her more than chains ever had. Her hands shot out, gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. The scent of blood and rain clung to him, sharp and intoxicating. "You should terrify me," she whispered, her lips trembling against his. "But you don't." And then she kissed him. It was not soft. It was not tender. It was raw, fierce, the clash of a soul that had been denied and a soldier who had forgotten how to want. Their mouths collided, teeth grazing, breath stolen, as though survival itself depended on that connection. Darren did not seize her. He did not dominate. He let her burn against him, matching her fire with steady restraint, until her body sagged, trembling against his. When she finally broke away, gasping, her eyes blazed. "You don't own me," she said, defiant. "I never tried," he replied, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. The tension cracked into laughter then, sharp, breathless, almost mad. Sarin laughed because she had kissed him and still belonged to herself. Darren allowed the sound, the storm outside echoing it back as though the world itself had been waiting for her defiance to bloom into freedom. But beneath her laughter, beneath his composure, something had shifted. The storm had not passed. It had only begun. The storm finally broke sometime before dawn, leaving the city wrapped in a heavy silence that smelled of wet stone and smoke. Sarin sat on the edge of Darren's table, her legs drawn up, arms wrapped around her knees as if bracing herself against something that had not yet arrived. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, her mind still burned from the choice she had made. Darren moved around the apartment with the quiet discipline of a soldier long accustomed to aftermath. He checked his weapon, replaced the power cell, stacked the spent cartridges in a neat line like soldiers awaiting judgment. His calm grated at her nerves. "You act as though none of it mattered," she muttered. His eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "It mattered. That's why I'm not panicking." Her tail lashed once against the table, a sharp sound in the silence. "You shot 3 of them. Do you think the Verge will shrug that off?" "No," Darren said, sliding the cartridges into a pouch. "They'll send more, which means we need to think." Sarin exhaled sharply, irritation buzzing under her skin. She hated that his calm steadied her, even as it infuriated her. She had spent her whole life expecting violence, chains, demands. Now, given silence and choices, she didn't know what to do with them. The room fell quiet again until her stomach growled, loud enough to echo in the small space. Darren glanced up. She glared at him, daring him to make a comment. "You sound dangerous," he said at last, voice perfectly deadpan. For half a heartbeat, she froze. Then, to her own horror, she barked out a laugh. It was sharp, too loud, and it startled her more than his pistol ever had. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, as though she had committed some crime. Darren raised one eyebrow. "You should work on stealth. That sound could wake half the block." Her laugh broke again, this time weaker, more like a sob disguised as humor. She hated that he could disarm her with so little. She hated even more that she wanted him to. When he set another ration packet on the table, she eyed it suspiciously. "You feed me, you guard me, you bleed for me. Are you trying to train me like some stray animal?" Darren leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "If you were an animal, you'd be easier. At least animals know what they want." The words landed like a strike, but they carried no cruelty, only a wry honesty that made heat crawl up her neck. She tore into the ration just to avoid answering. By the time the sun rose, pale light sneaking through the blinds, the apartment had begun to feel less like a prison and more like something worse, a place where she might actually want to stay. That realization terrified her more than the Verge. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "I need air." Darren looked up from his slate. "Not safe." "Safe is a cage," she snapped. "I'd rather choke on freedom than rot behind your locked door." His gaze lingered on her, assessing. Then, to her surprise, he rose and tossed her a jacket from the hook. "It's too big," he said, "but you'll blend better." The jacket smelled faintly of oil and rain, its sleeves hanging past her hands. She pulled it tight anyway, hating how much comfort she drew from the borrowed weight. They stepped out into the dripping stairwell together, the building groaning like an old warship. Sarin's ears twitched at every echo, every drip, every distant footfall. She moved close enough to Darren that their shoulders brushed, though she would never admit it was on purpose. When they reached the street, the world looked almost clean, washed raw by the storm. But the shadows were still there, hunched in alleys, watching. Sarin felt their eyes on her. Recognition, disdain, hunger. The wild one. The untamable slave who had slipped her cage. Her chest tightened. Instinct told her to bare her teeth, to make herself more dangerous than she felt. But Darren walked at an even pace, unconcerned, as though daring anyone to test his calm. His presence was a shield she both resented and craved. They moved toward the market fringe, where scavengers picked through storm wreckage. Saren's stomach knotted. The cages were still there, doors creaking in the wind, chains coiled like serpents waiting to strike. She could almost feel the ghosts of hands dragging her back inside. Her breath faltered. She slowed, her legs stiffening. Darren stopped too, turning to watch her with quiet eyes. "They'll see me," she whispered, voice ragged. "They'll take me." "Then don't let them," he said simply. The absurdity of it struck her. Don't let them, as if choice could erase years of chains. But the way he said it, flat, obvious, unquestioning, sparked a laugh that came out half hysterical. She pressed a hand to her mouth again, but the sound spilled through her fingers. Darren tilted his head, almost amused. "Do you always laugh at terror?" "Better than crying," she shot back. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to startle her. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning. They passed through the edge of the market, Darren's presence enough to keep most scavengers at bay. But one man stepped too close, his eyes fixed on Sarin with greedy recognition. "The wild one," he muttered, reaching for her arm. Before Darren could move, Sarin acted. Her claws slashed the air, ripping across the man's sleeve, leaving red lines blooming on his skin. He howled, stumbling back, clutching the wound. The surrounding scavengers froze. For a moment, silence swallowed the street. Then laughter broke. Low, cruel, incredulous. "She bites," one man jeered. "Always did," another chuckled. "That's why no one could keep her." The laughter grew, ugly and sharp. Saren's heart thundered, her vision tunneling. The words lashed at her worse than whips ever had. She wanted to scream, to claw, to tear until their mouths filled with blood. But Darren's hand closed on hers, firm, grounding. He didn't pull her away. He didn't silence her. He only steadied her enough that she could breathe again. "Come on," he said softly. "You already proved your point." The scavengers' laughter followed them down the street like chains. Saren's chest heaved, her teeth bared, her claws still wet with blood. But Darren's hand in hers was steady, unflinching. She hated it. She needed it. When they finally ducked into a narrow alley, hidden from sight, she spun on him. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. He raised an eyebrow. "Do I look like I'm laughing?" Her rage cracked into confusion. He was serious, deadly serious. And yet the way he looked at her, calm, unshaken, made her feel absurdly like she was the one being ridiculous. "You infuriate me," she snarled. "Good," he said. "Means you're still alive." For a moment she simply stared at him, her fury tangled with something hotter, something she couldn't name. Then against her will, laughter bubbled up again, raw, bitter, but real. Darren shook his head, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like wild indeed. The awkwardness clung to them as they made their way back to the apartment. Saren's mind reeled with the clash of humiliation and defiance, terror and strange hilarity. Every step beside Darren felt like walking a tightrope between collapse and flight. By the time they returned, the storm had begun again, light this time, pattering softly against the windows. Darren set his weapon on the table, his movements calm as ever. Sarin collapsed into the chair opposite him, her hair damp, her chest still rising too fast. Silence stretched. Then, without looking up, Darren said, "You laugh too loud for a fugitive." Her jaw dropped. "You?" But before she could finish, she caught the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. For the first time, she realized Darren could be amused, and the thought unsettled her more than chains, more than storms, more than any handler ever had. Because she had no idea what she might do with a man who could laugh. The storm outside whispered against the windows, like a secret, filling the room with a hush that made every heartbeat sound louder. Sarin sat in the chair, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders, her tail curling restlessly around the legs. Darren leaned against the counter, calm as ever, though the faint flicker of amusement had not left his mouth. She hated that look. She hated that he could be so composed when her veins were full of fire. And yet she wanted nothing more than to pull that composure apart, piece by piece, until he was as unguarded as she felt. "You think I'm amusing," she said, her voice low, daring. Darren met her eyes. "I think you're alive, and that's rarer than most people admit." Her lips curved, not in a smile, but in something sharper. She stood slowly, deliberately, letting the too big jacket slip from her shoulders. It slid down her arms and fell to the floor with a soft thud. Beneath it, the remnants of her tattered garment clung to her curves, barely modest, soaked from rain and sweat. She knew what she looked like: fragile, feral, beautiful in a way that frightened men as much as it tempted them. But Darren did not move. His eyes stayed on hers, steady, patient, unyielding. "You gave me choice," she murmured, stepping closer. "Do you regret it?" "Not yet." The air tightened between them. Saren's heart raced, every step forward a battle between instinct and desire. When she reached him, she lifted her hand to his chest, pressing her palm against the warmth beneath his shirt. His heartbeat was slow, infuriatingly steady. "Still calm," she whispered, leaning in. "Always calm. What would it take to break you?" Her lips brushed his jaw, testing. He didn't flinch. Her teeth grazed his skin, just enough to leave a mark, and his breath caught, just slightly, just enough for her to hear it. Triumph sparked in her chest. She pressed closer, her body aligning with his, her voice a trembling growl. "I want to know. I want to be the one who makes you lose control." Darren's hands rose then, finally his fingers brushing her arms. But instead of seizing, he held her as though she were glass balanced on the edge of shattering. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. His voice was low, rougher than before. Her eyes flashed. "This isn't about proving. This is about choosing." And before he could answer, she kissed him again. This time there was no hesitation, no testing. Her lips pressed against his with a hunger sharpened by years of denial. Darren responded, steady but fierce, his restraint burning hotter than any frenzy. His hands slid along her back, pulling her closer, but still leaving her room to move, to lead. The kiss deepened, breaths colliding, lips parting. Saren's claws grazed the fabric of his shirt, catching, tearing, until the button slipped loose and the cloth fell open. Her fingers splayed against his chest, feeling the heat of skin, the rhythm of a heartbeat that was no longer so calm. The sound of the storm faded. All she heard was his breath and her own, tangled together. All she felt was the heat of his mouth on hers, the strength of his hands steadying her waist, the way his body yielded without claiming. She pulled back just enough to speak, her voice hoarse, trembling. "Don't hold me like I'll break." "Then tell me how to hold you," he whispered. Her answer was a gasp, a desperate sound that carried both fear and surrender. She guided his hands herself, pressing them against her hips, her ribs, her scars. He followed, patient, careful, learning the map of her body by the pressure of her will. Each touch was a negotiation, each kiss a choice remade. She had known force, she had known violence. This was something alien, consent wrapped in fire, freedom entwined with desire. Her breath shuddered as his lips brushed her neck, tracing the line of her collarbone. Heat spread through her veins, burning away the ghosts of chains. Her tail curled around his leg, holding him as though anchoring herself in the storm. She tugged at his shirt until it fell away entirely, leaving only skin and scars, the map of his own wars. Her eyes traced them, reverent, curious. She kissed one, then another, as though claiming each mark not as a wound but as proof of survival. Darren's hands trembled now, no longer steady. He pulled her closer, his breath harsh against her ear. "Sarin! Say my name," she demanded, her voice fierce. His lips brushed hers again. "Sarin." Her knees buckled. The sound of her name, spoken without mockery or command, was more intimate than any touch. She kissed him hard enough to taste blood, Her own or his, she didn't care. The room blurred. The table pressed into her back as he lifted her onto it, his hands steady at her waist. She arched against him, her breath breaking into sharp gasps. Every nerve felt raw, alive, claimed by fire she had chosen to ignite. Their bodies moved together, not in ownership, but in collision, a storm of touch and heat. She clawed at his shoulders, not to push away but to anchor him. He held her fiercely, not to bind but to steady. Each movement was desperate, unsteady, beautiful in its imperfection. The storm outside built again, rattling the windows as though the world itself echoed their chaos. Inside, their rhythm grew wilder, sharper, until Sarin cried out, a sound torn from her chest that was not pain, not fear, but release. Darren followed, his breath breaking, his restraint collapsing at last. For a moment they were both undone, tangled in heat and breath and choice. When it was over, silence fell heavy, broken only by the storm. Sarin lay against him, her chest heaving, her hair damp against his skin. She waited for the chains, the commands, the mocking laughter that always followed. But Darren only held her, his hand resting gently against her back, his breath slowing in time with hers. No chains, no cage, only her name whispered once more, quiet and steady. Sarin. And for the first time she believed she belonged not to anyone else, but to herself. The storm eased into a lull, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, as though the world is holding its breath. Sarin lay still against Darren's chest, her body warm, her heart beating faster than it should. She should have been afraid of what had just happened, of what it meant, of what it might cost. Instead, she felt untethered. No chains, no handlers, no mocking voices, just the steady rhythm of his breathing, the weight of his hand resting at her back. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe in peace. And then the knock came. Not the subtle scrape of intruders, not the hesitant tap of neighbors. This was different. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, heavy enough to make the walls shiver. Sarin's body went rigid. She pushed up, her fox-like ears straining. Darren was already moving, muscles coiling with the precision of a soldier. He pulled her gently off the table and toward the corner. "Stay," he murmured, already reaching for his weapon. But the voice that followed froze her blood. "Open up, Darren. It's me." Her heart clenched. The name was wrong, yet too close. Darren. That was his name here. But the tone of the voice outside, the familiarity, the casual weight, spoke of someone who knew him not as Darren, the quiet recluse, but as something else. Darren stiffened. For the first time since she had met him, uncertainty flickered across his face. He glanced at her, something unspoken in his eyes before he crossed to the door. The locks clicked, the door opened, and a woman stepped inside. She was tall, cloaked in a dark officer's coat, slick with rain, her hair tied back in the severe fashion of military command. Her eyes swept the room with cold precision, and when they landed on Sarin, they narrowed. "You weren't supposed to bring her here." The words landed like a blade. Sarin's breath caught. She looked from the woman to Darren, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything. But he didn't speak. His jaw tightened, his hand still on the pistol at his side. The woman stepped closer, her boots clicking against the floor. "You were supposed to kill her, not shelter her. Orders were clear." The world tilted. Sarin's pulse thundered in her ears. Her tail lashed, her claws flexed. She had been right all along. Trust was a lie, safety an illusion. Darren, the man who had given her choice, who had risked his life, who had whispered her name like it mattered, he was one of them. Her voice cracked, raw. You were sent for me?" Darren's eyes met hers, dark, steady, but unreadable. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think," she spat, her voice rising. "You fed me. You touched me. You—" Her throat closed. "And all this time, you were waiting to hand me back?" The officer's voice cut through, sharp and merciless. He was supposed to end it. That was the deal. No loose ends. Sarin's vision blurred red. Rage and betrayal fused into something violent. She lunged for the door, but Darren moved faster, stepping between her and escape. "Move!" she hissed, her claws flashing. He didn't. His voice was iron. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be breathing. If I wanted you chained, you'd already be shackled. I made a different choice. Choice? Her laugh broke, wild and bitter. You talk about choice, but all this time it was a lie. The officer scoffed. You've grown soft, Darren. You were the best scout we had because you didn't hesitate. Now look at you, protecting an alien slave as if she matters. The words sliced deeper than chains ever had. Sarin's knees trembled. Alien slave, as if she were nothing more than a defective product. But Darren turned on the officer, his pistol raised. She's not a slave. Not anymore. The officer's eyes hardened. Then you've just signed your death warrant. The room exploded. The officer moved with soldier's precision, her sidearm flashing from beneath her coat. Darren fired, the bullet sparking against her shoulder plating. Sarin dove aside, the table overturning with a crash. The air filled with smoke, sparks, and the deafening crack of gunfire. Sarin's instincts roared. She grabbed the fallen chain from the corner, whipping it like a weapon. She lashed out, striking the officer's arm, sending her pistol clattering across the floor. The woman cursed, lunging at her with bare hands. They collided, claws against steel, fury against command. Sarin snarled, her teeth grazing the officer's neck, but the woman was strong, trained, merciless. She slammed Sarin against the wall, her grip closing around her throat. Animals don't deserve freedom, she hissed. And then Darren was there, ripping her away, slamming her to the ground. His pistol pressed against her temple, his voice steady. Say that again. The officer glared up at him, blood trickling from her lip. You'll burn for this. Both of you. For a moment, Darren said nothing. His breath came hard, his finger tightening on the trigger. Sarin waited for the shot, for the final end of choice. But instead, Darren lowered the gun. No, we'll burn together. He knocked the officer unconscious with the butt of the pistol, her body collapsing in a heap. Silence crashed back into the room, broken only by Sarin's ragged breathing. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her throat raw. You lied to me. I didn't, he said, his voice low, urgent. Yes, I was sent for you, but the moment I saw you, I couldn't do it. I made a different choice. Every step since then, it's been my choice. Her eyes burned. Betrayal and relief clashed in her chest until she couldn't tell them apart. She wanted to claw him, to kiss him, to run, to stay. Her body trembled with the force of too many truths. Finally, she whispered, If you betray me again, I'll kill you. Darren nodded once, solemn, fair. They stood in silence, the unconscious officer bleeding on the floor, the storm outside swelling once more. Sarin's heart still pounded, but something new crept in beneath the rage, a terrifying realization. If Darren had been sent to kill her, then others would come, and the cage she thought she had escaped might be nothing compared to what waited next. The unconscious officer lay sprawled across the floor like a warning, her blood pooling into the cracks of the wooden boards. The storm outside pounded harder, the rain drumming against the window like fists demanding entry. Sarin stood rigid in the corner, her chest heaving, claws half extended, her eyes never leaving Darren. The truth of what she had learned still burned through her. He had been sent to kill her, and yet here he stood, defying the command, pistol still warm in his hand. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to thank him. Both choices stuck in her throat like thorns. Instead, she said the only thing that came to her lips, What are we going to do with her? Darren glanced at the officer, then back at Sarin. That depends. You want her dead? The bluntness of it made her blink. She had expected him to hide, to dodge, to offer another one of his infuriatingly calm answers. Instead, he dropped the choice in her lap like a knife. She swallowed hard, staring at the woman who had nearly strangled her. Her scars ached just looking at her. But killing was final, irreversible. Sarin had lived in chains, yes, but even chains could be broken. No, she whispered. Not yet. Darren nodded once, as though that settled it. He dragged the officer into the narrow storage closet, bound her hands with a length of cable, and shut the door. The faint sound of her muffled groans filled the silence like an unwelcome guest. When he turned back, Sarin was still watching him with sharp, suspicious eyes. So what now, soldier? She asked, spitting the word like a curse. Now, Darren said, brushing blood off his knuckles. We prepare. Because if she found us, others will too. The words dropped heavy between them. Sarin wrapped her arms tighter around herself, suddenly cold despite the lingering heat of their closeness hours before. She thought she had escaped the cage only to find a larger one waiting. The silence stretched until her tail flicked in agitation. "You're too calm about this," she muttered. Darren raised a brow. "Would you rather I panic?" Her ears twitched. "It would make me feel less insane." For the first time that night, a hint of dry humor flickered across his mouth. "I'll keep that in mind. Next time I'll scream and flail so you don't feel alone." She glared, but the unexpected absurdity made a laugh slip from her lips before she could stop it. She slapped a hand over her mouth, furious with herself. Darren didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Better." The awkwardness thickened, wrapping around them tighter than the storm. Sarin hated the way her body betrayed her. Her laughter, her blush, the way her claws twitched not with rage but with restless energy. She wanted to stay angry. It was safer. But every time she looked at him, the lines blurred. Finally, she snapped, "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm more than I am." Darren tilted his head. "That's the problem. You are." Her stomach nodded. She hated him for saying it, for making her want to believe it. She turned away, muttering, "You're insufferable." "And you're alive," he countered. Their strange rhythm, half fury, half fragile humor, carried them through the hours that followed. Darren gathered supplies, reloaded weapons, mapped possible exit routes. Sarin prowled the room like a caged predator, restless and raw, throwing questions like knives. "Why me? Why didn't you just finish it like they told you?" His answer was simple, infuriating. "Because I didn't want to." "That's it? That's your grand explanation?" He looked up from his slate, meeting her gaze with those steady eyes. "Do you need it to be more complicated?" "Yes," she exploded, "because nothing in my life has ever been that simple. People don't just choose me." He set the slate aside, his voice quiet but sharp. "Then maybe it's time they did." Her heart lurched painfully. She wanted to claw him, to kiss him, to run into the storm. Instead, she growled, "You're impossible." "And yet here we are," he said dryly. She hated the way her laughter broke through again, jagged and unwilling. It spilled out of her chest like cracks in armor she couldn't mend. He didn't join her, but he allowed it, which was worse. The hours blurred. When night fell again, Sarin sat on the window ledge, her knees pulled up, her white hair glowing faintly in the neon spill of the city. She watched the stormlight flicker over the broken streets below, wondering if she would ever see them without fear. Darren approached quietly, setting a steaming mug near her. She sniffed it suspiciously. "Tea," he said. Her ears twitched. "What's tea?" "Leaves boiled in water." She stared at the mug, then at him. "That sounds disgusting." "Try it." She narrowed her eyes, lifted it cautiously, and took a sip. Heat slid down her throat, bitter and strange, but not unpleasant. She blinked, surprised. "It's warm." "That's the idea." She gave him a sidelong glance. "You're mocking me." "Maybe." The exchange left her chest aching, not with pain, but with something she couldn't name. She set the mug down hard, as if punishing it for softening her. The storage closet rattled suddenly. The officer groaned inside, weak but persistent. Sarin froze, her ears twitching. Darren sighed. "She's waking up." "Good," Sarin muttered. "Maybe I'll claw her throat this time." "You said not yet." Her eyes narrowed. "That was before she interrupted my first taste of tea." Darren's lips twitched, barely suppressing a laugh. "You're dangerous when caffeinated." The absurdity of the words made Sarin choke on her own laughter. She tried to scowl, but the sound escaped anyway, sharp and wild, filling the room until even Darren's composure cracked. For a moment, just a moment, the storm outside didn't matter, but the reprieve shattered when a low rumble echoed from the street below. Not thunder, engines. Heavy, coordinated, too precise to be scavengers. Darren's jaw tightened. He crossed to the window, peering through the blinds. "They're here," he said quietly. Sarin's claws flexed, her tail lashing. "How many?" "Enough." Her breath hitched. The storm of freedom she had found was about to be swallowed by war. And this time, choice might not be enough. She met Darren's gaze, her voice trembling but fierce. "Then we fight." His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering. And for the first time, he allowed the ghost of a smile. Together, wild one. Engines rumbled below like the growl of some mechanical beast. Sarin's ears twitched at the rhythm. Military transports, heavy and deliberate. Not scavengers, not handlers. This was something bigger. Her claws flexed, her body tense as a bowstring. The storm had carried her this far, but here it was again, pounding against the window as if to remind her. Freedom was never given, only taken. She looked at Darren. He stood steady, pistol in hand, his dark hair falling loose across his forehead, his eyes fixed on the street below. Calm, always calm. It should have infuriated her. Instead, it steadied her. "Tell me there's a plan," she said, her voice sharp but shaking. "There's always a plan," Darren replied, "but it rarely survives the first shot." Despite the fear thrumming in her chest, a laugh broke from her lips, jagged and unwilling. "You're terrible at reassurance." "Then stop asking me to reassure you." The exchange cracked the tension just enough for her to breathe again. She tightened the too big jacket around her shoulders, her tail curling anxiously around her leg. "If we fight, we die," she said softly. Darren finally looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "If we don't fight, we still die. Difference is, one way you choose how." The words settled deep into her chest, heavier than any chain. She thought of cages, of chains, of hands tearing at her freedom, and she realized choice mattered more than survival. "Then we fight," she said, her voice firm. Outside, armored figures moved into formation, their boots striking the wet pavement in unison. The storm hissed against their helmets, turning them into faceless shadows. A command barked, sharp as a blade. The first blast hit the building, shaking the walls, rattling the door on its hinges. Sarin's ears flattened, her claws scraping sparks against the table as she braced herself. Darren moved fast, tossing her a second pistol. She caught it clumsily, her fingers tightening around the cold weight. The last time she had held a weapon, it had been a chain. Now it was something else, a promise. "Stay close," Darren said. "Don't give me orders." "Then stay alive." The door exploded inward, splinters flying like shrapnel. The first soldier charged through, weapon raised. Sarin moved before she thought, her instincts a blur of claws and rage. She leapt, slashing across the man's arm, her pistol firing wild but true. He collapsed with a cry, blood mixing with rain. Darren's shots cracked steady beside her, precise as heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Each soldier fell with brutal efficiency, but more poured in, relentless. The room became chaos. Smoke, gunfire, the clash of steel and claw. Sarin fought like a creature reborn, every scar turning into fire, every wound into fury. She ducked under a strike, drove her claws into a throat, rolled across the floor, fired blindly into the storm of shadows. And through it all, Darren was there, steady as a rock, his calm anchoring her frenzy. They moved together, not in command and obedience, but in rhythm, like two sides of the same storm. Minutes or hours blurred into blood and thunder. When the last soldier fell, silence slammed down, so heavy it felt like the air itself had collapsed. Sarin stood panting, her chest heaving, her hair plastered to her face with sweat and blood. Her hands trembled around the pistol, but she refused to let go. Darren lowered his weapon, his breath rough but controlled. He scanned the room, then looked at her. "Still alive?" "Barely," she muttered. Her legs shook, her body burned, and yet she had never felt more alive. The officer in the closet stirred, groaning weakly. Sarin's ears flicked toward the sound, rage igniting again. She strode across the room, yanked the door open, and dragged the woman out by her collar. The officer's eyes flickered open, dazed but defiant. "You'll never escape. The verge doesn't forgive. They'll keep coming." Sarin's claws grazed the woman's throat, her fury sharp enough to kill. For years she had dreamed of this moment. Power reversed, chains broken. One strike, and she could erase everything the market had carved into her. But Darren's voice cut through the storm of her thoughts. "It's your choice." She froze, those words again. The weapon that had been denied her. Choice. Her claws trembled. She stared into the officer's eyes, saw the cruelty, the certainty, the chain that had once defined her. And then she released it. She shoved the officer back to the ground, snarling, "I'm not what you made me. I'm not your slave. I'm not your executioner either." The officer glared up, bloodied and defeated. For the first time, Sarin saw fear in her eyes. She turned away, her chest aching with something she didn't recognize. Freedom, sharp and terrifying. Darren stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly, steadying without binding. "You chose." "Yes," Sarin whispered, her voice shaking. "For once, I chose." The storm outside finally broke, the clouds splitting to reveal the faint glow of dawn. Light spilled into the wrecked apartment, painting the blood and ruin in pale gold. Sarin looked out the window, her chest tight, her heart hammering. She had expected to feel empty, to feel lost. Instead, she felt new. Darren stood beside her, silent, steady, watching the light rise with her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Serene turned to him, her voice soft but certain. "I don't belong to you." His lips twitched in that almost smile again. "I know. And yet," she hesitated, her throat tight, "I want to stay." The words hung between them, fragile and fierce, more binding than chains but freely given. Darren nodded once as if the choice was enough. "Then stay." The dawn spread wider, washing the broken city in light. Sarin breathed deep, her scars aching but her spirit unshackled. She was no longer the wild one, no longer the slave, no longer the untamable relic of the market. She was Sarin, and beside her stood Darren, not her captor, not her master, but her equal, her companion. Together, scarred but unbroken, they watched the sun rise, not as possessions, not as prisoners, but as two souls who had chosen each other, freely. The storm was over. For the first time, Sarin was free. In the end, freedom was never given. It was chosen. Sarin learned that even the most shattered soul can rise again when someone dares to see them as more than their scars. And Darren proved that strength is not in control, but in respect. This story is a reminder. We are never defined by the chains others put on us, but by the choices we make to break them. If this tale moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next journey into the unknown. Together, we'll keep exploring stories where love, courage, and humanity shine brightest among the stars.